If you've clicked on this video, it's because you want to become experts in the Italian opening. So in this episode, I'm going to show you all the secrets and all the nuances of this opening, which are many, and it's a very powerful opening. So let's get to it. As you can see, the Italian opening is what we have on the board. I'm going to show you how it would go in order of moves. We would play e4, they would play e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop c4. This is known as the Italian opening, and in this episode, we're going to study it in depth. We're starting right away so as not to waste time with the opponent's first response to the Italian opening, which is bishop c5. And I'm going to recommend the Giuoco Piano, which is a variation of the Italian that, in my opinion, is one of the strongest, and we're going to base it on the style of Kasparov, who was a true genius. You'll see, it has a spectacular plan of moving this knight from d2 to f1 and then later to g3 to launch a brutal attack and control the f5 square from the start. Why is this variation starting with c3 called Giuoco Piano or even Giuoco Pianissimo? Which means slow game or very slow game in Italian, because you can see that right now we're not attacking anything. That's why it's called a slow game. But later on, it will become a super aggressive opening, okay? After c3, the opponent's main response is to play knight f6, attacking the e4 point. And here we're going to play d3. As you can see, this structure, which many of you might not know, but many others will, is the Giuoco Piano structure, okay? Here, we're protecting the center with the d3 pawn, and also with the c3 pawn. We're protecting this square here and this square here, which you'll see will be super important. We're also leaving space for the knight to come through here and jump over here, which I'll tell you now is going to be a very typical plan for this structure. What advantage does this structure have? Well, you see, this is what we're gonna play if they play this move order, but they can also play knight f6 first instead of bishop c5. So since they're attacking the pawn, first we're gonna play d3, and when they put the bishop on c5, we'll play c3. Therefore, it doesn't matter. If they play bishop c5 first, we'll play c3 first, and then we'll play d3, okay? Here we have the Giuoco Piano structure. How to continue? Black in this position always chooses to play d6. Why? Because they already have a bishop out. They don't mind closing the space for it to return, and they have to open the diagonal for the other bishop. Here. And keep this well in mind, this is very important. We're going to play bishop b3. This is what Kasparov used to play, and we won't go into detail as to why right now, since these are more sophisticated ideas that we might see a bit later on. You might think it's so that bishop a5 can retreat to c2, but it has more important ideas, okay? Just remember that now you have to play the bishop to b3, where it will be much better placed. And now let's see how the games would continue from here. If I were to ask you what you would play with black here, I'd bet that most of you would suggest this move right here, pinning the knight and developing the bishop. However, even though it's the most common move in this position, it's actually a mistake, okay? And now we're going to look at how to punish it. Among grandmasters, the most popular moves here are castling, a6, or h6, all right? These are the most frequently played moves in this position by masters. I'm telling you, if you have less than 2200 or 2300 elo, they'll likely play bishop g4 here. And we'll see how to punish this mistake and why it is one, even though it looks like a very good move. First of all, he's pinning this knight, but he can no longer bring this knight to d4. Why? Because we have this c3 pawn, which, as we said, covered this square perfectly as well as this one. Besides, our plan to bring the knight through here in this Giuoco Piano variation will take this square from the bishop, making him lose a tempo. Therefore, here, after bishop g4, sorry, what we're going to do is play h3. Why? Because we're already going to gain a tempo on the bishop, and then, when we bring the knight through here, we'll make him lose another tempo, while we could have also played this move right here. Why? because now when we play the knight through here, we'd have absolute control with these two pawns over the f5 square. All right, so let's take a look at it. So we'll continue with h3, gaining, as we said, this very valuable tempo against this bishop that's wandering around the board, losing time constantly. And here, once they retreat it, having already lost that first tempo to maintain the pin, what we're going to do is keep delaying castling a bit and play knight bd2. Because, well, I already told you we have this crucial plan you can't forget in the Giuoco Piano Italian, which is to bring this knight through here, okay? Let's pause for a second. Everyone give me a like right now, and then we'll continue with the Italian, okay? Here, after this move, Black will most likely castle. Obviously, he has to make use of his development time, and here we'll use Kasparov's game as an example, where he first played Queen e2, although we could very easily continue with Knight f1, and that would also be good, okay? Let's look at this Kasparov game to better understand the plans. Queen e2, which is an excellent move, also closely related to the bishop on b3. Just to keep it brief, we'll say it's a good move and continue focusing on the plans of this Italian. Here, Black plays a6, a move, as we've said before, that's very prophylactic, a good move. Why? Because it gives this space for the bishop. It also gives space to play a b5 later on. And here, we obviously, instead of castling first, have to delay castling a bit and then place our knight on f1. What are we threatening here? Well, gaining an extra tempo on this bishop by placing our knight on g3. Black opens up an essential hole. Why is this move so essential right now? Because you see, if they don't make the a6 move first, after this knight move and the bishop's retreat, they'd already lose this bishop. So valuable after these two moves. Therefore, what Black has to do is open a hole on h6 to hide their bishop on h7 in case knight g3 comes. First of all, we can see that knight g3 here would be an excellent move. So if we look at the online game records, we'll see that white wins 71% of games, which is absolute madness with knight g3. The thing is that it's even more precise or even more aggressive and more powerful to play g4 directly, and if we look at the records, we see they win 73% of games. This is what Kasparov did. You'll see that Black after bishop g6 is left much worse. There are no games recorded like this among masters because masters don't play bishop g4, as it's a bit of an imprecise move, and after this bishop move, as you can see, he's lost a lot of tempi. 1, 2, 3. Even if these two moves come later, he'll have to lose a fourth, and as we can see, white is pressing hard and just improving their pieces toward the rival king, while black is losing time with their bishop and worsening their position. Here, yes, we're going to play our final plan now, which was to place our two knights around here. Besides, these two pawns are very strongly controlling the 5 point, even with this knight. When it retreats, it could also come to f5, and it would be a very strong knight. As I told you, the 5-5 square is a super powerful square, and black has to try to put pressure on this square, since right now a knight on f5 would be a very powerful knight. You already know it's Kasparov's favorite square to bring his knights, the f5 square. But instead of playing the knight directly here, what we're going to do, and our plan, is to play this little move here. Knight h4, why? Because besides controlling this square again with both knights, we're putting pressure on this bishop. Therefore, we're preparing better or in better conditions to jump to the f5 square with a knight. Black right now is very aware of how powerful these two knights are pointing toward f5. That's why they're not interested in withdrawing this bishop, since knight takes bishop doesn't pose any threat. Because after knight takes knight, black would be improving their position. They'd be eliminating one of our very powerful knights, and they'd also be gaining a knight jump to f4 that would benefit them. Therefore, this move doesn't pose any threat, since it's well protected. So black plays knight h7 here. Also, this move, maybe to jump back here, or many other plans to free up this pawn, shows us the importance of this bishop. on b3, which from a distance is pinning this pawn with the king behind it, so if he wants to move, he'd first have to make a move to h8, okay? That's why it's so important to have cornered this bishop, and it's an inaccuracy to play this bishop on g4 because right now it would be much better here, clearing the path for the pawn and protecting us from the pin, right? And that's what we have to take advantage of. Right now, already having a clear path to the 5 square, we have to choose which knight to bring. Well, let's see what Kasparov chose, who obviously chose the knight from a4 to bring to f5 since it's the worst place to the two. This knight is much better located. This knight could retreat just to here and come here, while this one is also occupying this square. As we said a moment ago, this bishop right now is very bad and this knight is very powerful. That's why black, obviously, has to exchange this knight, okay, for this bishop. Here, taken with the knight would be more of a mistake. Why? Because we would be giving away our two knights that were so powerful. Therefore, we have to take this bishop here with this pawn. Let's see why, too. By delaying castling, okay, we can open this line to, in combination with the rook and the knight, put a lot of pressure through here, okay? Why have we been able to open this flank? Okay? If we don't have the king castled, well, precisely because of that. We've achieved a very stable pawn setter. This is very important thanks to the Giuoco Piano variation. It's very important to get this stable center to be able to carry out a flank attack. You have to burn this into your head. We can't carry out a flank attack without a stable center, because otherwise we'll leak everywhere, okay? Here we're going to take advantage of this file now and a very weak king. As we can see, all the pieces are attacking through here, okay, the enemy king, and we're going to see how we have to continue to press, or how Kasparov did it exactly in this example, to keep pressing the opponent's king. Black tries to defend as best they can with knight f6. Why? Because they want to avoid this knight jump, but here we're simply going to continue with our plan, placing the rook on g1, and we can already see that almost, the black position falls to pieces. The king has to move away from this very powerful file that the rook has, and here we're going to play our knight f5 anyway. Why? Because here the black position is already totally lost, it's falling apart. As we can see, there are multiple threats here of knight takes and knight takes here. Therefore, black is absolutely forced to exchange this powerful knight, and after recapturing, this game can be won in many ways. For example, what would happen if black were to lose a tempo here? Well, we'd have as many possible threats as there are moves in chess. For example, we'd have the bishop, which hadn't even moved from c1 because it's not needed, sacrificing it on h6 because after taking it, it would be mate with the queen, okay? We could also directly sacrifice the rook, and after king takes rook, we'd have queen takes and mate on the next move, for example, with this move, okay? We'd have so many ways to win here that it's practically impossible. We could also break through directly with the pawn on f6, attacking the knight and attacking over here. You see, we're threatening mate in the next few moves, so this Kasparov game perfectly demonstrates the Giuoco Piano of this Italian variation. As we can see, this bishop g4 move completely destroys black's chances, even though it seems like the most natural move. Black is collaborating with us to help us win this game. Let's look at the next options, and I'll also explain what happens when black plays perfectly and what our plan is. I'll also explain why this bishop came this way and the queen to e2. So let's get right to it, because we have a lot to learn. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4 to set up the Italian opening. For example, bishop c5 will play c3, knight f6 will play d3 to have this very important pawn center of the Giuoco Pianissimo that gives us this refuge for the bishop. Protection in the center, we protect these two squares, all the ideas that the Giuoco Piano has. For example, let's look at what happens if they play this h6 move, also a very good move because it prevents these knight jumps, okay? We'll continue with bishop b3. I'll show you now, a little bit later, why this move is important. Here, black can continue, for example, with d6, and we would simply continue with knight d2. Okay? And now, for example, imagine they come with the knight here attacking this f2 point and forcing us to castle. Fine, chess teacher, but you told us that maybe it was better to delay castling to be able to open files for the rook. Yes, but if they make this attack, there's no problem with castling, since we could then move the rook aside to continue with our plan, okay? And also, here they're losing time because after kicking the knight out, we'd gain a tempo on it, okay? Let's castle, and here we'll see what happens if they play, for example, bishop e6. Here, we're not going to retreat this bishop, and I'll explain why. This bishop, as we've seen, it's a key defensive piece for the 5 square where we want to bring our knights. Therefore, we wouldn't mind at all if they traded it for our bishop. Why? What happens if instead of this they play knight to a 5? Then definitely not. Remember it well, we're not going to let this bishop be traded for this knight, but we'll protect it and also threaten to win a piece right now with b4. All right? This bishop isn't traded for the knight, but for this bishop, yes. What we also can't do is take their bishop ourselves. Why? Because after f takes e6, we're giving away an ideal support point for f5 with this pawn. Besides, doubled pawns, you know that if they're supported, they're not weak. But on the contrary, they add more strength to the center, all right? And we're also leaving, for example, this file open so that the bishop and the rook meet, and after these maneuvers of ours, this point can be very weak, okay? Therefore, if they attack us with knight to g4, let's review, we have to castle no matter what to protect this point, and that benefits us. Careful, remember, it benefits us. Black castles, we kick the knight out to gain this tempo, and when they retreat, we continue our plan with rook to e1. You know the plan for rook to e1 is to pass the knight as always through f1 and bring it out to g3. We always have this plan, all right? When they play the bishop to e6, remember that we have to let it be traded, unlike with this knight. We'll then continue with our plan of knight to f1. Why? To bring it to g3, all right? Here, if they capture us, we'll recapture with this pawn, and here we'll continue with our plan. Now, after black's move, a logical move to connect their rooks, we bring our knight to g3, our favorite square for this knight, and remember why we haven't taken this pawn with the queen, even though we're doubling pawns. You know that these pawns, since they're supported and not, for example, isolated, are not weak. And we don't want to bring this queen through here, but we want to bring it to f3. You have to remember this. The queen wants to go to f3. You know that if we have clear ideas, then obviously it won't be hard to take with the pawn, and it'll be much easier to develop the game if we have a clear plan. This queen, this queen wants to go to f3, for example, after a logical move by black. We, instead of bringing the knight to f5 first, which we already could, are going to take a bit more advantage of our good development, bringing our knight to h2, which seems like a very strange idea, but if we have the plan, it's a very normal move to make. Why? Because we leave this square for the queen, and this knight could come here to take out the best defender of the castled king, and we'd have many pieces attacking. Therefore, this move right here, knight h2, is a very logical move in our plan, okay? For example, here we can move the queen to f3, and we'd have it positioned. And we've just reached the ideal position we want for the Giuoco Piano game. Here we're practically winning already, and we have many possible finishes, where we're going to place our knight on f5, and we'll see that, for example, after d5, a very logical break in the center, we have so many finishes. For example, the most direct one, bishop takes h6, and after this move, we could then come in with the queen over here, and mate would be inevitable. We've seen the ideal position and how to get to it. We've seen how to punish two of the opponent's mistakes that don't look like mistakes, but we're going to take advantage of every inaccuracy to crush them with the Giuoco Piano. And now I'm also going to explain the reason for the bishop on b3 and the queen on e2. I'll explain it to you easily now. So going back to the starting position, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, setting up the Italian opening. For example, bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3, setting up the Giuoco Piano as we've already seen. Here, why after d6, for example, which is the most typical response by grandmasters and also in online games, everyone here plays d6 to bring out their bishop. Why is it so important to play bishop b3? As I told you before, and many of you might think, it's to avoid knight a5 capturing this bishop and to be able to have this escape square. The thing is, it's not exactly for that reason, okay? The thing is, right here, if they play knight a5, we'd have this bishop move, bishop b5 check, and the bishop becomes slippery after c6, bishop a4. b5, the bishop would already have its square on c2 to retreat to. And besides here, we'd be threatening a very powerful b before winning a piece, so they'd have to withdraw one of the two. And after b4, this knight could no longer return to c6 and would go back to a very bad square like b7 could be, since this knight is useless right now. It can't get out anywhere. Therefore, this is not the idea behind playing bishop b3. Let's see what the real idea is. The real problem with not playing bishop b3 in this position, let's suppose. Let's suppose that instead of playing bishop b3, we're going to play knight bd2 to follow our plan of knight f1. And here, black, for example, castles, we continue with knight f1. Here, they can play the tremendous move, d5. Why is this d5 move so strong right now with the bishop on c4? You see, right now, they're attacking the bishop on c4. We can't move it away because they'd be taking this pawn, they'd trade queens, and they'd also win this pawn. And our attack would all come crashing down because of having the bishop on c4. Therefore, we are forced to take. Once we take, we have lost the support point at f5. Therefore, this also ruins our plans. You know that the 5 points supported by this pawn was the key to supporting this knight. Therefore, this, is the real reason for not letting them play d5. And that's why moving this knight to this bishop, on b3, and it's not exactly because of the bishop, because of the knight on a5. Because you see that this bishop is quite slippery and could escape without any problems. d5 is the real reason why we play bishop b3. So I hope you loved this great version of the Italian opening. I'll leave it here. Look at the TV, my channel. Subscribe, Bowls. Subscribe everyone so you don't miss any of my videos. Like and hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.